Our new podcast series titled The Dinner Table features Derek Boylan, who was our guest in the Focus Session series. Magellan is on a mission to reunite families at the dinner table to help them become closer, sharing and more loving. The dinner table is not only an area for eating, but a place for gathering, sharing, communicating and where relationships can prosper. Studies show there are enormous health benefits for the whole family with lower rates of anxiety and depression. Derek Boylan, father of 9 and director of the Centre for Life, Marriage and Family in the Archdiocese of Perth. He's also a lecturer in counselling at the University of Notre Dame in Perth. Welcome back again, Derek.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back, David.
No, good to have you. Now, the first two questions are a slight rehash of the previous two podcasts, but they're important points. We've spoken about the ideas behind the dinner table and why it's important for families to share a meal together at a time when in a busy world, many don't come together much at all, sadly. We've also spoken about the physical and mental health benefits of those who share a meal, Derek.
Definitely. Yeah, look, we've spoken a fair bit about it. And it's, I guess the key takeaway is that, family meals are just such an important part of the day, and they can have such an important impact, on the individuals in those families and the families themselves, in terms of us being on the same page, transmitting values and beliefs and learning how to solve problems, building communication skills, establishing that safe foundation of family. They're just such an important part of life and such a simple thing that families can do that can make a big difference in terms of a flow-on effect.
Yeah, no, it is a simple thing. I don't know about you, but when I go into houses sometimes and I see the dinner table or the kitchen table, and I think, I wonder how many times the family actually sit around those tables. It used to be so important when I was growing up, when you were growing up, but now I often feel like they gather dust.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think about my own experience. Karen and I had a bit of a chat about this just recently, and in my family growing up, we would always have our set place at the dinner table, in the evenings. And one of the things that we would always do before family meals was we'd say grace. We'd say grace as a family. And for a little while in my family, we had this sort of funny dynamic where my position at the dinner table was the closest to the pantry. So if, there was something missing off the dinner table, if there was, I don't know, if the butter was missing or the pepper or the salt or something, Dad would say, Derek, can you get the pepper? Derek, could you get the salt or the butter? And as soon as I got up to leave, they would start grace. Everyone would sort of start grace. And for a little while, I must have been about 14 or 15 years of old, I found myself thinking, what, am I just the family slave? Am I not sort of important here in this family that, they all start grace while I'm sort of getting their food? And I remember thinking so clearly at that time that I would never do that to my family.
Yeah.
That one day when I had a family of my own, that actually it's really important that everyone's there, and if someone's taking a little bit to serve their dinner out, well, we'll wait, until we're all there and we'll have family dinner as a family. And because that experience of grace, of coming together, is actually an important part of us starting that meal together.
Yeah, no, it is funny what you remember, and our parents aren't perfect, just like we're not perfect. But you look back and you think, well, I won't do what Dad did because I think that was right. So you do something else, but then my son will probably not do things that I have done because he thinks I wasn't right. It passes on from generation to generation.
It sure does, absolutely. It's kind of interesting how those sort of patterns get handed down, and only change slightly from each generation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when I was growing up, family of 6, which I've mentioned in the past, I can't remember too many occasions, Derek, where we didn't sit down as a family at night. We'd wait for Dad to come home, usually around 6:30, and then Mum would serve up. It was a different time, but it was a wonderful time.
Oh, it was. And to have that regularity of life and that sort of routine that was sort of predictable, in life was really sort of an important part. And it's often difficult, families these days, when they have dual incomes and sometimes parents are working in the evenings or, in WA, a big one is fly in, fly out. So, often there's a member of the family who's sort of missing. And so it's not always possible on a daily basis, but certainly on a weekly basis. It's really healthy for families to just find that place of connection, find that place of coming together, sharing a meal with one another.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. So this podcast is about growing faith at the dinner table. As the George Michael song goes, let's talk about faith, baby, and that's what we're going to do. The spiritual side of families coming together is invaluable, I would have thought. You would agree with that, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably in a way, in terms of the family meal, one of the most important parts of the experience of being a family is that sort of spiritual element to it. You know, family and faith and sharing meals, they all go together. I think we have a tendency sometimes to think about spiritual or to think about, faith and to think of church. We sort of think of our local parish or as some sort of place that's separate from our home. But really, it's actually about family. And Pope Francis says something really wonderful recently in one of his documents. He said, he had a sort of an interesting definition of the family, of the church. Sorry, he had an interesting definition of the church. And he simply said that the church is simply a family of families.
Yes.
That actually our experience of the spiritual, our experience of faith should really be the experience of a family.
Yeah.
People who care about one another and trying to build a life together.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And look, in many respects, the dinner table has a Eucharistic and communal type element to it. Just as Jesus broke bread and shared a meal with his disciples, the importance of families being together shouldn't be underestimated or certainly not undervalued.
Oh gosh, I agree. In Western Australia, in the art gallery we have over here, there is an image of a series of paintings of Jesus, and they're very simple, paintings. They're Jesus feeds some chickens, Jesus heals a fox, and in each image of Jesus. In this series, the artist has portrayed Jesus as really quite a sort of a short, stocky kind of a man. He's not the, the He-Man that often we see on a crucifix with a six pack
Yeah.
and strong. He's just this little short, stocky guy, and I always find myself wondering about this sort of portrayal of Jesus. And when we think about the Gospels, Jesus kind of eats his way through the Gospels. He's kind of like, well, I'm going to your house for dinner, or I'm going to go here for dinner, and those sorts of things. And he leaves us this sort of legacy of, sharing a meal with one another. So you sort of mentioned that idea of Eucharist and the meal being Eucharistic, and I think that's probably true. When we think about, the church when we think about the Mass, the
Yes.
church sort of defines the Mass as the source and summit of our faith. And I think that the family meal is actually kind of meant to be that for our families. It's a source. We've talked about that before, that when we come together as a family, that there's all these good things that come out of that, for the individuals and for the family. So it is a source of life for a family to come together and share a meal. And it's also the summit, right? It's also, the celebration of all of those things that are happening in our lives. That's why we often want to celebrate with a meal birthdays, anniversaries, those sorts of things. It's a time we come together, and it's sort of the summit of our experience of our shared life together. I think you're right. There is something profoundly Eucharistic in that experience of a family meal when we do it regularly in our home.
Yeah, I mean, humans do tend to complicate things, let's be honest, but in Jesus' time and what he was saying, and, when he did break bread, it was all very simple. The messages were very simple. We have complicated things as humans do over time, and that's just what we do. But it shouldn't be. His messages was just so simple and so relevant 2,000 years later.
Oh, definitely. And the way he went about it was so simple. It was just, I just think of recently we had the story of Zacchaeus, climbing up the tree to see Jesus, and Jesus just saying to him, "Hey, I'm coming to your house for dinner tonight," where Jesus really, he preached to the Pharisees and all these different other places, but when he really connected with people, it was in their homes. It was around a meal. And I think it reflects what we were talking about in our first podcast around that experience of the ancient world, that meals were about connection, about being together, and not so much just about consuming food.
No, as important as nutrition and consuming food is, it's that connection thing, and certainly that's what Jesus was trying to get across as well. It's also interesting to note how many times food is mentioned in the Bible. For example, the miracle of the loaves and fishes to the wedding feast at Cana. It says to me that family and sharing food is a powerful spiritual presence.
It is. I sort of think when I think about connecting around food, and when I think about the spiritual as a counselor, I spend a lot of time in a counseling room, sitting with couples and families and individuals, and often hearing very personal stories. Very personal stories about their journey, about their experience of life. Some of those really, I guess, those challenges are maybe things that no one else has heard. Maybe the only kind of place where those things get expressed is in their prayer life. But I think for families, the family meal is often that place as well. It's a time when we actually share more intimately the things that are going on. We spoke in a previous podcast that teenagers, 80% of teenagers say that the one place where they are most likely to talk to their parents is actually at the family meal, at the dinner table. And so I think we sort of have to keep in mind that there is a spiritual element. It's not just a practical thing, not to be dismissive of those conversations, that they're actually really spiritual conversations too.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And sharing a meal can help families grow together in love and faith. I mean, that's stating the obvious, really, but two things that really go hand in hand: love and faith.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think it's probably the most powerful way is the family meal that we can form those relationships in faith and love. And I think it's probably a part of God's plan, right? I think often we sort of think about God's plan for our lives as about, personal holiness and, being sort of without sin or something. But in my mind, I kind of think God's plan is that one day you and we will live in perfect harmony with one another. That I'll see you and you'll see me, warts and all, mistakes and all, failings and all,
Yeah,
hopes and dreams, and we will be found lovable. We'll be found, forgivable and careable. And I guess, when I think about my experience as a father, I just sort of this came to me just a while back, David, that when I was thinking about what is the most fulfilling experience in my life, when am I the most happiest in my life? And what occurred to me is that one of the places where I am the happiest in my life is when I'm at dinner time and my whole family is there. No one's missing.
yep,
Everyone's there and everyone's getting along. Everyone loves one another. Everyone cares for one another. And we're joking and we're sharing stories and we're enjoying each other's company. And we're talking about important things and also the joys and the
yeah,
little things of life as well. And there's just a sense of belonging, a sense of happiness. And I can imagine that's kind of what God's plan for heaven might be like,
yeah,
that God's, that if any of that is missing, my happiness is diminished, and I can
sure.
imagine it's like that for God. And so in a funny way, our family meals, when we share, those family meals, it's actually preparing our heart for heaven. It's actually preparing us for not just this world, but, eternal life as well. It's sort of shaping us to be who God really longs for us to be in our relationships with one another.
Yeah, I mean, we all strive to be better people, and we fail at different times, and then we get up and try again. And yeah, I mean, life's like that, isn't it? It's full of trials and tribulations.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah,
It's we're going to face those sorts of things, and the family meal is often the best place to sort of just connect and find reassurance and support, and to know that we belong to people who care about us and that are sharing the journey as well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, my memory of I grew up in Adelaide, and I moved to Melbourne when I was in my mid-20s. But Mum used to often say, Dad would get very excited when I'd say I'm coming home this weekend for whatever, and we'd have a nice family meal together. And we grew up quite close, going to the football together and all that sort of thing. But yeah, he loved it when I came back to Adelaide to catch up for the weekend.
Yeah, one of our sons at the moment, he's studying over east and in Sydney. And one of the things I always say to him is, when families invite you over for dinner, you have to say yes. That's actually really important that you still have that experience in your life. That if you can't find it in your own family because you're far away from us, you need to find that experience in other families as well. To know that part of our family is not just for us; it's for for other people too.
Yeah, absolutely right. Derek, for some families who aren't very spiritual, it may not be quite the same, but are there things that they can bring to the dinner table to help them grow as a family?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things that I think are really important is one is to sort of build ritual around your family dinner time. Different families will look different for different families, but building ritual around the experience of family life is really important. So to give you some examples, at Christmas time in our family, when Advent starts, we usually put an Advent wreath on the table, and it just sort of reminds us, it connects us with, this season and what's happening in other areas of our life. That in our family we usually say grace before meals, and that's just, it can just be a very simple prayer. It doesn't have to be anything complex. It can be just simply, God, thanks for this food, and then you get started with dinner as a family. And as I mentioned, in the first podcast, one of the simple rituals that we have in our family is simply making sure that the sort of the first conversation in our dinner time is simply, what was the best thing that happened today? What was the highlight of your day? And we just go around and we just, take 20 seconds to just share whatever the highlight was. It's about recognizing that, what's important in each other's lives is important to us if we care about each other, and building that ritual, recognizing that this is a time for celebration and connection is really important. I guess my other sort of experience sometimes is that, I find more and more, and particularly in my work with couples, often they want to be able to explore the spiritual more in their lives. Sometimes families don't know the way into those conversations. It sort of feels a bit like they kind of want to have those conversations, those deeper, meaningful, purpose of life sort of conversations, but they're not really sure how to open the door to that sort of conversation. And so a strategy I recommend to couples and families is to just get into the habit of saying grace before meals. Just at least maybe one meal a day, maybe it might be dinner, but just to get into the habit. And as I said, it doesn't have to be a complex sort of prayer or any of those sorts of things. It can just be something really simple. It can just be, as I said, God, thanks for this food and thanks for our family.
Yeah.
And what they do when they do that is they just keep a window open. They just keep a sort of little gap in their lives open, that if they wanted to have a deeper sort of conversation about spirituality, that they kind of can, that because they kind of keep that little door just ajar, that there might be those times where they kind of think, you know what, it's funny, something happened to me today that I'd like to share, and that conversation becomes okay. So just sometimes I think just something really simple, like a simple grace, can be just a great way to keep the door open for those deeper conversations if they want to have them.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and you don't have to make it complicated. It can be quite simple. And I mean, every morning I wake up and I'm still breathing. I thank God that I'm still alive, especially after the last 2 years of pandemics. And I don't know how many jabs in my arm, and the last jab I got actually quite hurt for a few days. But I'm glad I've had it. But I feel grateful and blessed with my life. I mean, like everyone, it doesn't go to plan every day. But I've got a lot of good friends, great family. And I've got a job and I've got a roof over my head. I can't really complain, to be honest.
Gosh, there's so much for us to be grateful for in our life, and gratitude, actually sharing those things, is a powerful way to fight back against anxiety and depression, actually. That often people, even sometimes people, I can imagine there are some families when they do have those brief moments as a family and things seem to be kind of going well, there is this sort of a little bit of a dread that creeps in. They kind of think, oh yeah, but they're just waiting for things to go wrong. And what research shows is the best way to fight back against that is with gratitude. It's just kind of go, well, God, right now it's good, and thank you for that. Thank you for these people who care about me. Thank you that we've got food on our dinner table. Thank you that people care about me. That's the way to fight back against those feelings.
No, that's a good word, gratitude. It's not something that comes up a lot, but I think that's a very important word too. So you've made some good points there, Derek. Are there any other things in a spiritual sense, do you think, families, how they can grow together?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. One is that, to sometimes use meal times to, I guess, just share about God at work in your life. Let me give you an example. So, as you would know, the last couple of months for me have been exceedingly busy, and I was sort of sharing with my children the other day when we were having dinner that it just felt like I just feel like I'm in a flood, and it just keeps raining and raining and raining, and and I can't seem to get on top of it, and I feel like all I've got is one bucket. And I'm just scooping, and as I'm scooping, more rain keeps coming in. And I just sort of said to them, and I just said, just briefly, just a little thing there. And I just sort of said, but I felt, the other day when I was at prayer, I just felt God say to me, Derek, well, you better get scooping. And, it didn't sort of solve all the problems, but I really felt that, all right, okay, God, you see it. Keep going, just keep getting on with the work.
Yeah.
It's not Bible bashing them. It's not proselytizing them, but but actually finding those little moments. We do sometimes have those little experiences of sort of somehow got it work in our lives, and just and not being afraid, just in a very natural way, to share them, because a mealtime often is a place where, in a very natural way, we can just sort of open up a little bit of a conversation or a little bit of a sharing around that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I guess a couple of other thoughts. Liturgical seasons are a great time, to include at the mealtime. Just finding ways that maybe, during Lent, we have those key themes of prayer and fasting and almsgiving. You might want to change your meal times a little bit at those times. Maybe, all right, we have a tradition in the church of maybe not eating meat on Fridays for many families. And it's just a way of sort of marking this time is a little bit different. We're sort of called to reflect in a different way. And as I said before, at Advent, maybe having an Advent wreath or something like that. Or maybe, a photo of someone particular that's important in our life that's on the table that we just want to be reminded to pray for that person. They might be ill or struggling. And just, I guess, more broadly, just including spiritual elements in your home. Often just little things like, gosh, many families have the rosary beads hanging over the back door, or a little image of St. Joseph, or those sorts of things. Just just those little presences. I really like sort of St. Francis of Assisi, his advice, that always preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. That actually sometimes we can just create in our home a space that sort of speaks to the spiritual, just by just the natural sort of elements that we have there. And I guess the last thing is really tapping into our core values. Letting our core values guide our decision making.
Yeah.
If I think in our family life, one of the simple rules in our family life is that people always come before things. That people, our relationships with one another, they're more important than the trampoline. They're more important than who gets the remote control of the TV. And that's just a constant message, and that if you're fighting over the remote control, well, let's put the remote control away, because you two probably need to work on your relationship more. And the other one for us is just cultivating the virtues. When maybe things aren't going so well, if the kids aren't getting along, one of the things that we sort of reflect on is, what is the virtue which, had it been present, this wouldn't have happened in the first place? If you'd been a bit more patient, or if you'd been a little more humble, if you'd been a little bit more, gentle, this problem wouldn't have occurred. That a good consequence should be an opportunity to practice that virtue, an opportunity to sort of grow in that virtue. Well, I think, buddy, you probably need to grow in a bit of patience, or you need to grow in a bit of gentleness. How about you're in charge of feeding the dog this week, or whatever it might be, and giving them a capacity to sort of grow in those areas.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's about the spiritual, right? The reason that we do these things is because we know God loves us and he does so much for us, and we want to respond in a way that is, is to live a life that is principled and valued and has meaning.
Yeah, absolutely right. And they're saying again that gratitude is it's a very important word. And I don't know that there's enough of that around these days. You just see a lot of selfishness, and there are a lot of good people too. But and you don't want to dwell on the negative, but there are people out there who tend to be about themselves and not others, and that's sad to see.
I agree, and I think we sort of live in a culture which really idealizes independence and autonomy. That my life is all about me, but the reality is, I guess Aristotle would say that there's no such thing as a baby. There is only a baby and its mother. That a person can't exist in the world outside of relationships. We need other people, and they need us, and it's at the family meal table often where we have the primary opportunity to build those relationships with one another.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's good to see. I can see one of your children joining you. That's great. Even though this is just an audio podcast, you do have a big family. And we're nearly at the end of this one, Derek. Growing in faith at the dinner table. It's been a fascinating chat. Perhaps just to recap some of the main points you'd like to say again.
Yeah, look, I guess the main point is that, our meal times are a really important opportunity to grow closer to one another, but they have a deeper meaning, like a deeper purpose in that spiritual sense, and nurturing the fullness of who we are, bodily, with the food that we eat, socially, in the relationships that are around us, and also spiritually. And I think I just wanted to sort of, I guess, add one thing there, David, and that is that, when I think about, there's a real challenge here for us, in terms of our families around mealtime. When I think about the ancient world and the early, sort of the experience of early Christians and the early church, we often think about the church as being parishes and church buildings and archdioceses and all those sorts of things and priests and religious. But
Yeah.
the reality is, for the first 400 years of the life of the church, it grew in people's homes. It was families, and mostly it was families around meal times.
Yeah.
Joining together and sharing a meal and sharing each other's journeys and reaching out to others, not just their own family mealtime and what it did for them, but also recognizing that there are many people in our lives who often don't have that experience of family around them, who are lonely, who are struggling. And it's an extraordinary gift at Christmas, Easter, and at other times, just inviting people into our homes to join us for a meal, to be a part of our meal. Sometimes it helps us to get our families around the dinner table if there's another person coming to visit and become a part of that meal as well.
Yes.
And I think that that's really a way that our families can. I think it's a real challenge for us in this day and age, that it's a way that our families can actually bless the world, is by making our family mealtimes a gift for others as well.
Sure. And we know even at Christmas and it can have its problems among siblings and families. People who don't want to turn up because they don't get on with the sibling or the mother or the father or whatever. I mean, that happens in most families too, different stages.
Gosh, my counselling services increased significantly in the weeks leading up to Christmas and the weeks immediately following Christmas. And it's all that coming together and trying to somehow be family. And I think it's a funny thing. It raises the issues and the challenges, but also that shared meal is a part of the solution as well.
Good on you, Derek. Great talking to you again. I think we've got a couple more podcasts planned at some stage, but thank you for your time today.
Terrific. Thank you, David.